I went to the gym yesterday to work out, and lo and behold, there was a beautiful orange and black C8 Corvette in the lot, and so I parked next to it because why not?
Toys for life.
As I got out of my C6, the idea for this video popped into my head, so I broke out my camera for an impromptu video comparison. I think the idea to compare these two generations jumped into my head because I'm finally starting to consider the possibility of adding a C8 Corvette to the garage now that prices have dropped quite a bit over the past 2 years.
They have a lot of really nice cars sitting out here that can be had at a discount brand new, and that's seriously driving down the used car prices as well.
What's pretty crazy to think is that when these cars were new, most of them had dealer markups of $10,000, $15,000, even $20,000.
C8 Corvettes are down $44,000 compared to their market top and can now be found for $55,000.
Making them much closer to being within reach than they used to be. As luck would have it, a few minutes later, a black C8 pulled up and parked right next to us, so I now had two C8 Corvettes to take my time and visually compare my beloved C6 to. This is the first time I've had the opportunity to compare my C6 live in person and side by side with the C8 Corvette, and here are the top 10 things that jumped out at me. The first thing that jumped out at me is that the C8 is noticeably wider than the C6. Take a look at the fronts side by side and you can absolutely see it. The C6 looks kind of small by comparison. As it turns out, this is not an illusion. The specs say that the C8 is 76.1 inches wide and the C6 is almost 4 inches narrower, coming in at 72.6 inches wide. From the rear end you can see it as well, but I don't think it's as obvious when you're looking at them from the rear as it is when you look at them from the front. Let me know in the comments if you think the C8 looks too big or maybe the C6 looks small. What do you guys think? The second thing that jumped out at me is after confirming how much wider the C8 is, I walked between the cars and looked at the front and rear wheel center lines of both cars, and from that particular vantage point, it was clear that the C8's wheelbase was a tiny bit longer than the C6's. But when you take a few steps back, you can see that the overall length, bumper cover to bumper cover, of the C8 is clearly longer than the C6. More precisely, the C8's overall length is almost 8 inches longer than the C6. And in case you're wondering, the C6 is a smidge taller than the C8 by about a half an inch. The next thing that jumped out at me are the wheels on the C8. They kind of look like they're the same size or maybe even smaller than the wheels on the C6, at least to me. But it turns out the front wheels are roughly the same width and the same diameter, but the ones on the back are about 20 millimeters wider and 1.5 inches taller on the C8. I guess it must just be how wide and tall the rear quarters are on the C8 that make those tires look a little bit smaller than they really are. The fourth thing that jumped out at me, and it always does when I look at the C8, is the C8's interior. This is one aspect of the comparison where there really is no comparison. The C8's interior is simply beautiful, it uses higher quality materials, it's more functional, and almost everybody agrees that it's light years ahead of the C6's interior, especially the seats. In fact, if the C8 seats weren't so damn expensive on the used market, I would pick up a set and swap them into the C6 in a heartbeat. The only aspect of the C6's interior that I like better is the gauge cluster. In my mind, the C6 gauges and the C5 gauges for that matter are this close to perfection, and I think that Chevrolet should just put the same gauges with minor tweaks in all future Corvettes. The fifth thing, and this really isn't fair, but that's too bad, because of how badly the C8 interior destroyed the C6's interior in that last comparison, I'm going to do it anyway. Here's a sound comparison between the C8 and the C6, starting with the C8. Now that wasn't too bad, but it really wasn't all that special either, especially for a $60,000 plus car. Next up is the C6, and it does have a relatively simple cam and header upgrade. The really is no comparison in the exhaust sound. Now, it did take a while, but the tuning code has finally been cracked on the C8s, and guys are finally able to put in aftermarket cams and headers, superchargers, that sort of thing, but it is quite a bit more difficult and, of course, much more expensive. The seventh thing that jumps out at you is that you have the ability to see the engine in the rear of the C8 through the glass. Now, it's not necessary that you have the ability to see it, but I must admit, it's pretty cool. Now, besides the simple pleasure of being able to see the engine of the C8 through that glass, having the engine located in the back does a heck of a lot for acceleration, which we'll see in just a little bit. Now, to be fair to the C6, there was an option to be able to see the engine through the hood, and it was even a supercharged engine in the C6 variant known as the ZR1.
It's a complete madman.
In case you're interested, you can pick up a used C6 ZR1 with more horsepower than you could probably ever use for around 80 grand. If you happen to have a regular, more run-of-the-mill C6 like I do, you're just gonna have to open up the hood to see the engine. The eighth thing that jumps out at me, and it really started with the C7 Corvette, is the design of the rear end that once again breaks with that long-standing tradition of Corvettes having 4 round taillights. Ever since the C1 Corvette got that redesign in 1961 that gave it 4 round rear taillights, that tradition became a signature of sorts for Corvette. It continued with the C2 Corvette and the C3 Corvette and the C4 Corvette and the C5 Corvette and of course the C6 Corvette, and then the C7 came along and just broke with the tradition, and the purists weren't happy at all. The C8's rear end violates that same unwritten rule that the C7 did, but I must admit I think I've gotten used to the C8's rear end, and it's a lot better now that there are several spoiler options, including this one, that I like quite a bit. By stark contrast, here's a C8 without any spoiler at all, and to me, it looks like a key ingredient is missing. There's actually quite a few rear spoilers available now for the C8, but I think some of them actually make the rear end look worse. Nope. 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 Ah, now that looks just about right. Now, to be clear, I still do like the C6's rear end quite a bit better, but if I was to get a C8 Corvette, I like the rear end enough, especially with the spoiler, that if I parked it in a parking lot and looked back at it as I walked away from it, I would smile. The ninth thing that jumps out at you is that the C8 Corvette is missing the manual shifter, and I get it, that's a deal breaker for a lot of guys out there, but understand that the C8's dual clutch automatic is nothing like the torque converter slush box automatic transmission that existed in American cars for decades. The C8's dual clutch automatic is essentially just 2 manual transmissions located within the same housing. It even has 2 clutches that, instead of being shifted with your hand and your foot, are shifted electronically by the computer.
The TR9080 DCT 8-speed dual-clutch transmission is a transaxle drivetrain that combines the transmission, integrated limited slip differential, and axle drive in one compact package. It delivers the efficiency of a manual transmission with the speed and smoothness of an automatic, driven by dual clutches that precisely orchestrate system timing.
If you prefer a manual transmission because you like the ability to upshift or downshift exactly when you want to, and you wouldn't mind if it shifted 3 to 5 times faster than the average car guy's shift time, then you should embrace the dual clutch automatic, unless of course you don't like its added complexity or you just simply prefer the nostalgia of rowing your own gears. The 10th and final thing that jumps out at me anyway, every time I get excited about the possibility of parking a C8 inside this garage, is the price. Picking up a C8 Corvette for about $60,000 is an absolute steal, especially when you think about how much more it would cost for a mid-engine sports car offering this level of performance from the competition. That having been said, the C6 Corvette is no slouch, and it also offers a tremendous amount of performance for the money, and you can pick up a C6 for about 1/3 of the price of a C8, and that's something to think about, unless of course money's no object. But is the C8 faster than the C6? From a dead stop? Yes, it is. However, from a rolling start, add a camshaft and headers to your C6, and that will close the gap considerably between the C6's 400 to 430 horsepower and the C8 Stingray's 490 horsepower. And that's a wrap on this one, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please go ahead and tap that thumbs up for me. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And most of all, thanks for watching.